In just 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett, a black female attorney, was insulted, threatened, and humiliated by a powerful federal judge. But minutes later, she exposed him so brutally that the FBI walked into the courtroom with handcuffs. This isn't just a courtroom drama, it's the collapse of a corrupt empire. What else was Judge Carter hiding? And how deep does the rot go? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Federal Courtroom 3B was not a place where surprises typically occurred. It was the kind of courtroom where bureaucracy reigned, where the days bled into one another, and the calendar flipped without resistance. But not today. Today, beneath the dull gleam of worn ceiling lights and between the groaning wooden benches that had seen decades of quiet verdicts, something unspoken began to shift. The case was simple. At least that's how it was filed. The United States versus Faith and Family Foundation. On paper, it was a standard fraud hearing. The charges: misappropriation of donor funds, potential laundering, and intentional misrepresentation of organizational purpose. But those words, cold, bureaucratic, clinical, masked a more dangerous narrative. Because what sat at the heart of this case was not numbers, but beliefs. Faith and Family was no backroom operation. It had operated for over 20 years, building schools, funding addiction recovery programs, supporting military families, and yes, loudly supporting pro-life and pro-faith policy. Their donors were mostly working-class families from red states. Veterans, ministers, teachers, moms. People who scraped together $20 checks to keep the light on, believing that their money went to something bigger than politics. And yet, here they were, dragged into court under a cloud of suspicion that felt anything but impartial. No one missed the irony. The judge presiding over this case, Henry Maxwell Carter, had a record so openly antagonistic to conservative groups, it practically glowed in the dark. In the last 7 years, he had dismissed 24 similar foundations as shields for political propaganda, and once called faith-based charities the velvet glove of radical influence. He rarely hid his disdain. He didn't need to. He was the law here. What nobody in that courtroom yet realized, not the prosecutor sipping his coffee, not the twitchy clerk flipping through her docket, not even Carter tapping his gavel in irritation, was that this wasn't going to be just another case. This wasn't a trial about a spreadsheet. This was about whether truth still stood a chance against power when the power wore a robe. And Faith and Family? They weren't the ones on trial today. Not really. Today, it was the system itself being weighed. And before it was over, someone was going to fall. The doors opened with a slow, deliberate groan, and every conversation in the courtroom died mid-sentence. Jasmine Crockett stepped inside, not hurried, not hesitant, but with the gravity of someone walking into a war she knew was already stacked against her. The fluorescent lights caught the edge of her glasses and glinted off the silver clip binding a thick stack of documents clutched tight in her left hand. Her suit, navy blue and sharp at the shoulders, cut through the beige monotony of the room like a scalpel through cloth. She moved without apology, without deference, heels clicking crisply across the tile floor in a rhythm that dared anyone to interrupt it. The clerk's eyes widened slightly. A juror in the back straightened in his seat. Even the court reporter paused, as if unsure whether to start a new page. Jasmine didn't glance left or right. Her gaze was locked on the bench, where the man who'd ruled this room like a monarch leaned back with thinly veiled disdain. Judge Henry Maxwell Carter raised an eyebrow, not out of surprise, but irritation. The kind of irritation born from entitlement, a man so used to controlling the narrative, he resented any character he didn't cast himself. His robe draped heavily over his frame like armor, but Jasmine wasn't intimidated. She had walked into rooms like this before, rooms where her presence alone was a provocation, where the combination of her skin color, her youth, and her position made people assume she must be someone's assistant, not the one carrying the evidence that could collapse their empire. Judge Henry Maxwell Carter reclined ever so slightly in his high-backed chair, the thick folds of his black robe cascading like drapes over a throne. His fingers tapped once, twice, then steepled in front of his face as he stared down at Jasmine Crockett. Not like an equal, not even like an opponent, but like an intruder. His smirk spread slowly, the corners of his mouth curling upward with practiced arrogance. The room had grown quiet, as if everyone sensed he was winding up for something. And then, with a voice laced in poison, dressed as authority, he delivered his line. "You think this is the White House, Ms. Crockett?" His tone was thick with condescension, dragging out her title like it offended him to say it. "Let me explain how this works. In here, I am the law." The effect was instantaneous and brutal. Laughter erupted across the courtroom like a match dropped in dry grass. It wasn't just a chuckle here or there. It was collective, corrosive. Jurors looked at each other and smiled. One man near the gallery let out a low whistle and said, "Oof, she walked into that one." The court clerk lowered her gaze, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. Even the prosecutor cracked a grin, shaking his head as if to say, "That's what you get for showing up where you don't belong." And in that moment, Jasmine wasn't just alone. She was surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. To them, she was the outsider, a woman who didn't wear a robe, a black woman, young, confident, uninvited, walking into a place built to grind people like her into dust. The laughter wasn't about the joke. It was about making sure she knew exactly where she stood, beneath them. But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't shrink, didn't fumble for her papers, didn't adjust her seat or bite her lip or blink away the humiliation they tried to drown her in. She let them laugh. She let it fill the room like smoke, thick and suffocating. And then when the noise finally began to fade, when the echoes of their mockery started to die down, she struck. Not with anger, not with volume, but with a calm so sharp it could cut glass. She turned her head toward the bench slowly, deliberately, her eyes locking onto Judge Carter's with unshakable precision. "Law," she said, her voice smooth but ironclad, "is not something to be bent by whoever holds the gavel." The words didn't rise. They didn't need to. They simply landed, solid, undeniable, like steel dropped on marble. The courtroom went still, completely still. Someone coughed. Another cleared their throat. A juror's pen fell silent mid-scribble. It was as if her voice had sliced the oxygen out of the room. She continued, her tone unwavering, her presence anchored. "It's not a tool for ego. It's not a mask for bias. And it's not a crown for a man who confuses power with righteousness." That last sentence didn't just land. It detonated. The silence that followed was no longer dismissive. It was tense, uncertain, shifting. Judge Carter's jaw tightened. The smirk that once held court over the room faltered, his lips pressing into a thin line of restrained fury. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not like this. Not so publicly, not so unapologetically, and never by someone who came armed not with excuses, but with facts. Jasmine sat back, her hands folded calmly over the stack of documents she'd brought like weapons of war. She didn't look around to see who still doubted her. She didn't have to. The power had shifted, and she'd done it without raising her voice. Just like that, the courtroom remembered. This wasn't a performance. This was a reckoning. The moment the last echo of laughter faded into the walls, Jasmine reached forward and unfastened the thick binder in front of her with a quiet, deliberate click. She didn't glance up. She didn't ask for permission. Her fingers moved with practiced certainty, flipping past the first few pages until she landed exactly where she intended. Then she spoke, not loudly, not hurriedly, but with the kind of quiet precision that silenced doubt. "The Faith and Family Foundation," she began, her voice steady as steel wire, "is not guilty of financial misconduct. It is guilty only of operating under values that some people in this room find inconvenient." A ripple moved through the gallery, not quite a sound, but a shift in posture, a flicker of attention. Jasmine turned a page, held it up for the judge, the jury, and every spectator to see. "This is an independent audit report conducted by Simmons and Hawley, dated March 1st, fully compliant, fully transparent." Her eyes rose then and locked directly onto Carter. "And this," she said, tapping the next document, "is a donor ledger showing every transaction, publicly disclosed down to the penny." Carter's jaw clenched and the tips of his fingers tapped impatiently on the arm of his chair. He didn't interrupt, yet, but the tension in his posture screamed. Jasmine went on, flipping to the next set of papers, with the calm of someone walking through a fire she refused to acknowledge. The accusations in this case didn't arise from accounting errors, she said. They originated in a media campaign launched by affiliates of the Liberty Fund, which, coincidentally, has a track record of targeting faith-based organizations with opposing political alignment. She let that hang for a moment, then continued. In other words, this isn't about fraud, it's about framing. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, whispering something to his aide. The court clerk stiffened. The jurors were now fully focused, some leaning forward, others scribbling notes faster than before. But Jasmine's tone never changed. Your Honor, she said, her gaze unwavering, this courtroom was weaponized before I ever stepped into it. My job today is to show you where the bullets came from. Judge Carter exploded, slamming his open palm against the bench so hard that a tremor ran through his gavel, rattling the glasses of water on the attorneys' tables. This is a courtroom, not a Trump press briefing, he roared, his voice cracking through the chamber like a gunshot. The walls reverberated with his fury, and the spectators jolted in their seats, startled by the sheer venom behind his outburst. His face had flushed a deep, dangerous red, and a vein pulsed visibly on his temple. He wasn't just angry, he was losing control. You think you can walk in here with your headlines and your politics and hijack my courtroom? He barked. This isn't cable news, Miss Crockett. I won't tolerate grandstanding from anyone, especially not from a political pawn. The word pawn landed with intention, a blade meant to cut beneath the surface. The clerk looked down. A juror blinked rapidly, unsure where to look. For a moment, it seemed like Carter had reclaimed the room by sheer brute force, but only for a moment. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply closed the binder in front of her with slow precision and leaned back in her chair like a fighter catching her breath between rounds. If you're not interested in hearing the truth about faith and family, she said, her voice low but unmistakably sharp, then perhaps you prefer we talk about the Liberty Fund instead. The name hit the room like a dropped grenade. The air tightened. Someone in the gallery audibly inhaled. Carter froze, just for a second. But in that second, something shifted. His rage didn't vanish, but it flickered, hesitated. Jasmine continued, folding her hands calmly over the close file. Because I have just as much to say about them. And unlike speculation, what I have is documented, time-stamped, and signed by you. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The courtroom that had laughed at her minutes ago was now dead silent. And at the center of it all sat Judge Henry Maxwell Carter, suddenly very still, very pale, and for the first time no longer sure who was on trial. His voice dropped, quieter now, but all the more venomous for it. Say one more word, he hissed, his eyes locked on Jasmine like a predator sizing up his target. And I will personally petition the White House for your dismissal. A hush swept over the room, but it wasn't the quiet of respect. It was the stillness that comes when everyone senses a line has been crossed. Even the court reporter's fingers hovered above the keyboard, motionless. The implication was brutal and crystal clear. Challenge this man in his courtroom, and he'll end not just your credibility, but your entire career. The threat wasn't legal. It was political, personal, vicious. A power move meant to humiliate her in public and destroy her in private. Jasmine's jaw tensed, but she didn't break eye contact. She had faced injustice before, but rarely had it been so brazen, so proudly wielded from behind a bench meant to protect fairness. The energy in the room shifted. A ripple of unease spread through the audience. Lawyers exchanging glances, a reporter in the back scribbling faster now, a veteran in the gallery narrowing his eyes. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about one charity anymore. Carter's aggression wasn't judicial, it was desperate. Jasmine didn't speak, not yet, but her silence screamed louder than any protest. She didn't need to argue that something was wrong. The judge had just told the world himself, with his threat, his tone, his fear. And for the first time since the hearing began, people in the courtroom began to wonder, what exactly is this woman holding in that binder? And why is Carter so afraid of it? Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached into the binder with the calm of someone unsheathing a blade. She pulled out a printed document, 4 pages stapled cleanly at the corner, and held it up for the court to see. "This is a bank statement from the Cayman National Bank," she said evenly, dated March the 16th, one day after Judge Carter handed down a ruling against the American Liberty Coalition, a conservative organization denied standing in this very courtroom. She walked to the evidence display with deliberate steps, clipped it to the projector, and hit the button. The screen lit up, revealing Carter's name printed neatly under the recipient field, followed by the number, $100,000. There was an audible intake of breath from the gallery. A pin could have dropped and echoed. Jasmine turned back to face the room, eyes steady. "The deposit came from an offshore holding company traced back to Liberty Fund affiliates," she continued. "No invoice, no service rendered, no explanation, just silence and a 6-figure reward." Judge Carter's hand twitched on the bench, fingers drumming faster now, betraying the panic rising beneath his carefully composed scowl. "That document is irrelevant," he barked, but there was a crack in his voice now, small but unmistakable. Jasmine didn't blink. "Then why was it followed," she said, flipping to the next page, "by another deposit, this time $75,000, 2 weeks after a separate ruling that blocked funding for another conservative nonprofit?" She slid the next document into view. Same bank, same offshore entity, same silence. The room had stopped breathing. Even the clerk, whose hands had been trembling minutes ago, stared openly at the screen, frozen. Jasmine took one step forward, voice still calm but now edged with fire. "Is it your position, Your Honor, that all these deposits were just coincidence?" she asked, each syllable cutting sharper than the last. "Because if so, I have 8 more pages of coincidence right here." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, charged, like a lightning strike waiting to fall. Jasmine reached into her binder again, her movements precise, surgical, as if every page she touched was a detonator. "Bank statements alone," she said, her voice unwavering, "might raise questions. But emails? Emails answer them." She pulled out 2 printed sheets, thick paper, bold headers, timestamps locked to the second. "This," she said, lifting the first page and walking it to the overhead projector, "is an email sent from Judge Carter's official address, HCARTER, at fedva.courts.gov, to an executive at the Liberty Fund, time-stamped March 17th at 8:43 a.m. The screen lit up with the text, bold and damning. "Thank you for the timely support. The issue with the Liberty Coalition has been resolved as discussed." Jasmine let the silence stretch for a beat, then looked up at Carter. "That email was sent less than 24 hours after the $100,000 deposit hit your account," she said, "and one day after you ruled against them in a case that, until your intervention, had overwhelming evidence on their side." The judge's lips parted, but no words came. His face had gone a shade paler, the red in his cheeks replaced by something closer to ash. Jasmine didn't stop. She lifted the second page. "And here," she continued, "is a follow-up email from April 9th. Same sender, same recipient, different subject line." She flipped it onto the screen. The subject line read, "Faith and Family. The Body. The case will be handled as expected. Appreciate your continued trust." Gasps rose from the gallery now. No longer whispers, but raw reactions. One woman clutched her mouth. A man in the back muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Jasmine turned back to Carter. "Your Honor," she said, each word deliberate and ice cold, "this isn't just coordination, it's conspiracy. You didn't just rule. You planned. You promised." She folded her arms across her chest, staring at him like a prosecutor already giving the closing argument. "And the people in this courtroom deserve to know. Who else did you promise?" The air was thick enough to choke on. Carter gripped the bench like it was the only thing holding him upright. He wasn't in control anymore, and everyone knew it. Carter's grip on the bench began to fail him, fingers twitching as if struggling to obey the commands of a brain spiraling into panic. His mouth opened, but what came out wasn't language. It was a stuttered gasp, a jumble of syllables fighting to form a denial that never quite arrived. Those documents are..." "That's not real," he sputtered, but the words collapsed midair like broken scaffolding. A dark sheen of sweat glistened across his forehead, and a thick droplet rolled down the side of his face, disappearing into the collar of his once starched white shirt, now visibly damp and clinging to his neck like a noose. His hand reached for his pen out of instinct, a judge's final prop, the symbol of control, but his fingers fumbled and the pen slipped, clattering against the wood and spinning across the courtroom floor with an accusing ring. The room didn't breathe. The fall of that pen sounded like a gavel in reverse, the sound of judgment crumbling. Jasmine didn't even look up. She was mid-sentence, her voice steady, slicing through the room like a scalpel through silk. "May 3rd, she read aloud, lifting another page, her tone clinical and cold. $50,000 transferred from Basalt Holdings Limited. Same Cayman account, same Liberty Fund ties. This occurred 48 hours after the sealed suppression of whistleblower testimony in the Mitchell versus Liberty case." Her eyes finally flicked toward the bench, sharp as a blade unsheathed. "Is that another coincidence, Your Honor?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a challenge delivered with the calm fury of someone who'd endured too much silence, too much corruption, and too many men like him. Carter's lips trembled, jaw clenched so tight it quivered, his body no longer seated in command but locked in survival mode. The man who once ruled from that bench now looked like he was drowning in his own robe. And Jasmine, she didn't stop, because injustice didn't stop, not until someone like her forced it to. Suddenly the mask cracked and the judge roared. "Lies!" Carter shouted, his voice rasping like an engine stripped of oil. "This is fabricated garbage. Doctored files. You think I'm going to sit here and let a political puppet smear my name?" His chair scraped backward as he jolted to his feet, face flushed, veins bulging at his neck like ropes about to snap. The air in the courtroom trembled, not from his authority, but from the sheer desperation laced in every syllable. "These are forged!" he barked again, pointing a shaking finger at the projector screen, now displaying his own name tied to foreign wire transfers. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he spat, eyes burning holes into Jasmine. "Just another mouthpiece in a suit, sent by the White House to take me down." But no one moved. No one spoke. Even the clerk looked frozen in her seat, pen halted midline. This wasn't the voice of a man confident in his innocence. This was the scream of someone watching his armor shatter in real time. Jasmine remained seated, her face still and unreadable, but her silence was louder than his tantrum. She let the storm rage, and then, with chilling control, flipped to the next page in the binder, like she hadn't just been screamed at by a federal judge. Carter's fist clenched, knuckles white, but his voice cracked again. "This is a setup. All of it. I don't even know half the people she's talking about." His words were frantic now, flailing, and somewhere in the gallery someone whispered what everyone was thinking. "He's unraveling." And for the first time, the courtroom wasn't afraid of him. They were watching him fall. The courtroom sat frozen in the tension Jasmine had carved open, but she didn't bask in the silence. She drove through it. As the final document from her binder was projected onto the screen, another damning wire transfer, another judge's signature, another lie caught in the light. She paused. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped, just slightly, steady and deliberate, signaling the shift from confrontation to revelation. "This," she said, "isn't just about one judge in a few corrupted cases. This is about what happens when power hides behind robes and titles, and no one dares to ask why." Her words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, lingering, undeniable, dangerous. She took a breath, then added, "This isn't new. It's just exposed." She turned from the screen and stepped forward, the weight of her next words gathering behind her like a wave. "In 2018, a judge in West Virginia was found guilty of taking money from a private prison company," she said, her eyes scanning the courtroom slowly. "Why? So he could hand out longer sentences, not based on justice, based on profit." The gasp that rose from the gallery wasn't theatrical. It was horrified. Jasmine nodded once, solemn. That man put teenagers behind bars for decades, because every year of prison time meant money in his pocket. She let that settle, then stepped even closer to the jury box, voice like a steady drum. He wore a robe just like Judge Carter. He spoke of law just like him. And people trusted him, just like this courtroom trusted this bench. Then came the dagger, quiet, cold, and aimed straight at the soul. And just like now, no one saw it coming, she said, because no one wanted to believe a judge could sell justice. Her gaze swept across the room. Jury, press, spectators, even the bailiff. But here's the truth. If we stay silent, justice gets auctioned off behind closed doors. She pointed to the screen again, where Carter's signature glowed beside the timestamp. This isn't fiction. This is happening. Today, in this room. The weight of her voice didn't shout. It pressed down like gravity. And for the first time, many in that courtroom realized they weren't watching a trial. They were watching a warning. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room had already tipped, perched on the edge of something irreversible. And then, without fanfare, she reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and pulled out a slim, matte black digital recorder. It was small, insignificant to look at, but the way she held it, raised gently at chest level like an offering to the truth, made the air itself seem to recoil. Every eye in the room followed the movement. Carter leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes, nostrils flaring, not with curiosity, but with a primal, silent panic. Jasmine's thumb hovered over the play button for only a second. Then she pressed it. The recorder beeped once, and then came the voice. It was grainy but unmistakable, low, commanding, threaded with arrogance. "Delete all the Faith and Family files," the voice ordered. A pause then. "If anyone asks, say they were misplaced." Silence fell like a slab of stone. The courtroom, alive with murmurs seconds ago, froze. The voice wasn't edited, wasn't AI generated, wasn't paraphrased. It was real. Raw. It was Judge Henry Maxwell Carter, in his own voice, giving a direct order to erase evidence in an active federal case. The first sound to break the silence was the thud of someone's pen falling to the floor. Then a breath, sharp and panicked, from the clerk's bench. The young court clerk, no older than 30, sat rigid in her chair, her eyes locked on the recorder as if it were a loaded weapon. Her hands began to tremble, her mouth parted. For a moment she tried to hold it in, biting her lip, squeezing her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. But the dam broke. "I didn't want to," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He made me." Heads turned. Her shoulders shook as she tried to continue, her breath hitching with every syllable. "He said if I didn't delete the files, if I didn't do exactly what he told me, I'd never work again." She looked straight ahead, eyes wide and glistening. "He said no one would believe me, that it'd be his word over mine." The tears came now, hot and unrestrained. She covered her mouth with one hand, the other still clenched around her notepad like it might keep her from falling apart completely. Across the courtroom, you could feel the axes shift. This wasn't politics. This wasn't debate. This was coercion, recorded and confessed, witnessed in real time by a room that could no longer pretend not to see. A juror audibly whispered, "My God!" Another leaned forward, forehead in his hand, eyes wide in disbelief. The defense attorney beside Jasmine sat back slowly in her chair, lips parted, staring at Carter like she'd never seen him before. Carter didn't move. He didn't breathe. The color had drained from his face, his features locked in a frozen mass that teetered between rage and ruin. He opened his mouth slightly, but no sound came. Not a word. Not a denial. Not even a protest. Because what could he say? It was his voice, his words, his orders to bury the truth and destroy lives to protect his own. Jasmine finally broke the silence, not with volume, but with gravity. "That was your voice, Your Honor," she said, turning to face him squarely, her tone low and devastatingly calm. "That wasn't taken out of context. That wasn't speculation. That was you, giving a direct order to obstruct justice." She stepped forward once, her voice rising, not in anger, but in command. "You didn't just break the law. You shattered the public trust. and you used fear as your shield while threatening the very people sworn to serve this court." She turned then to the clerk, whose head was bowed, shoulders still shaking. Jasmine's voice softened. "You were brave," she said gently. "You're not the one on trial today." Then she turned back to Carter, her eyes now sharp enough to pierce steel. "But you are." She raised the recorder again. "And this isn't hearsay. This is confession, on tape, before a courtroom, before a nation, and before every person you swore to serve, but chose instead to betray." No one spoke. No one coughed. No one dared to move. It wasn't just that Jasmine had exposed corruption. It was that she'd done it with undeniable, irreversible clarity. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't stormed. She'd let the truth speak for itself. And in doing so, she'd stripped a federal judge bare in front of the system that once shielded him. And all she had to do was press play. The moment hung in electric suspension. One breath, two, and then it shattered. The rear doors of the courtroom didn't open gently. They burst apart with a force that made the entire room flinch. Even the bailiff flinched. Every conversation stopped mid-syllable. Every head turned. Silence dropped like a curtain as four figures stepped inside. Broad-shouldered, black-suited, armed not with weapons but authority. The letters across their chests made the room inhale sharply as one. FBI. They didn't yell. They didn't need to. Their presence roared in every step that echoed down the marble aisle like war drums. They walked with the precision of a closing trap. The spectators instinctively pulled back, chairs scraping against tile, jurors frozen in place, some with mouths still open from the last shock. One agent took the lead, tall, calm, his face carved from granite, and when he spoke, his voice was steady thunder. "Judge Henry Maxwell Carter," the agent declared, voice projected to every corner of the chamber. "You are under arrest for bribery, obstruction of justice, and destruction of federal evidence." It hit the room like a bomb. Audible gasps. A woman dropped her phone. A man in the gallery clapped once before catching himself. Carter didn't move. Not at first. His face went from white to ashen, then flushed red, like blood couldn't decide whether to stay or flee. His eyes darted toward Jasmine, then to the jury, then to the agents. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then, without warning, he lurched to the side. He ran. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't calculated. It was animal. Pure instinct. His black robe tangled around his legs as he leapt down from the bench, nearly tripping over the hem. He shoved past the stunned court clerk, knocking her files to the floor. "I won't let you do this to me," he screamed, voice cracking into something almost childlike. "I'm a federal judge. I have immunity. I have rights." He didn't head for the main door. He bolted toward the judge's private chamber, the side hallway that once promised refuge, now his last escape route. But justice had already accounted for that. Two agents moved simultaneously. One blocked the hallway with a clean pivot, arm raised in warning. The second intercepted Carter at the side, grabbing his arm mid-stride. The judge twisted, snarled, elbowed, thrashed, his movements wild, incoherent, nothing like the man who had once sat towering above the courtroom like a god. "Get off me! This is a trap, a setup," he bellowed. But it was no use. His left wrist was yanked behind him, then the right, and then click. The metallic bite of the handcuffs echoed like a final verdict. Carter froze, his shoulders jerking once as if in disbelief that the cold steel wasn't a hallucination, that it was real, that it was over. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, but in noise. Cheers from the back row, stunned murmurs, a shout of "finally" from the gallery. Cell phones shot up. Flashbulbs popped like a paparazzi ambush. Someone whispered, "Get this live." A woman with tears in her eyes clapped slowly, deliberately. The very same courtroom that had laughed at Jasmine when she walked in now stood to record the moment she turned the entire system upside down. Carter spun wildly as the agents restrained him. "You're making a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong," he shouted, though the strain in his voice betrayed the collapse of his defenses. His robe was half off his shoulder now, his tie pulled loose, sweat soaking through the collar of his shirt in dark stains. His once slicked hair stuck to his forehead in damp strands, and in his eyes no more fire, no more judgment, only fear, raw, undiluted fear. "This is political," he shrieked. "I'm the law here." Jasmine stepped forward, calm, upright, unflinching. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to say, "Not anymore." The image said it all. The man who had once tried to destroy her career was now shackled, his reputation dissolving in real time, dragged away under federal custody, while she stood, silent and still, the last woman standing. As the FBI led Carter down the aisle, the crowd parted like a tide. People leaned in with their phones, capturing every second. The bailiff didn't move to stop them. Even he looked relieved. One of the jurors, older, grayer, whispered to his neighbor, "That's what justice looks like." And then the doors shut behind Carter, a man once untouchable, now undone. While the courtroom still buzzed from Carter's arrest, down the corridor behind the bench, through a door few outside staff had ever entered, his private office sat in thick, artificial silence, a place meant to be a sanctuary of law, now reduced to a crime scene. The FBI's forensic team moved with discipline, opening drawers, photographing every frame, sweeping every shelf for hidden compartments. A ceiling fan clicked above, the only sound competing with the soft whir of latex gloves moving through files and folders. The bookshelves were lined with legal volumes, some never opened, some hollowed out. The desk, dark cherry wood, ornate, had 3 locked drawers. The third required a pry bar. Inside that bottom drawer was a cardboard folder, unlabeled, tucked behind a false panel barely half an inch thick. One agent pulled it out, opened it, and paused. "Agent Morris," he called, voice flat but urgent. The lead agent stepped forward, took the file, and unfolded it carefully under the light. For a moment he said nothing, just stared at the list stapled to the inside flap. Typed, aligned, systemic. 7 federal judges. Names well known in legal circles. Next to each, a case ID, a Liberty Fund shell company name, a corresponding bank transfer date, and the amount, one by one. No ambiguity, no guessing. Every entry was clean, damning, and frighteningly organized. He turned the page, another sheet, case summaries, cross-referenced decisions where conservative organizations had been mysteriously denied fair trial access. Rulings suppressed, evidence sealed, motions thrown out. Agent Morris exhaled, a long, bitter breath. "This isn't just Carter," he said. "This is a coordinated system." A network. Jasmine Crockett had been standing quietly just outside the doorway, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on the edges of the operation like a hawk waiting for the wind to shift. She stepped inside now, slow, measured, heels clicking softly on the polished tile. She said nothing at first, just looked down at the document in Morris's hand. She read the names, her expression carved from stone. Then she spoke, and her voice filled the room with a force that made the agents straighten unconsciously. "If there are more like him out there," she said, "then I won't just help you find them. I'll drag every last one of them into the light." Agent Morris glanced up. "This list," he said, lifting the page slightly, "this is bigger than any corruption case we've touched in the last decade." Jasmine nodded once, eyes locked on the page. "Which means it's exactly where we start," she replied. "This isn't just about bribes. It's about trust, broken in the highest offices of justice. These men weren't just bought. They sold the law. And they did it behind closed doors with the flag behind them and the Constitution under their feet." Another agent nearby, younger, looked visibly shaken. "Do you think it goes beyond judges?" he asked. Jasmine's answer came without hesitation. "Of course it does," she said. "Money doesn't stop at one office. It moves through every crack unless someone seals the whole damn wall." She turned back toward the door, but paused, glancing over her shoulder. "I'll testify. I'll bring more evidence. Whatever it takes. But promise me one thing." Agent Morris raised an eyebrow. "Don't just go after the easy ones," she said. "Go after the ones who thought they were too powerful to ever get caught." He gave a tight nod. "We will." She stepped out, and the agents returned to their work, bagging the documents, sealing boxes, photographing every inch of the corrupted office once cloaked in credibility. But the story had changed now. Carter wasn't the climax. He was the first domino. The air inside the courtroom remained heavy, thick not just with shock, but with the quiet, dawning realization of something much darker. As Agent Morris held up the sheet of names, another gasp rippled from the gallery, not loud but sharp, like a memory ripping open. A man seated near the back, gray hair, eyes wide, leaned forward, eyes fixed on the paper being sealed into an evidence bag. I stood trial in front of the third judge on that list, he said aloud, barely above a whisper, yet somehow it carried. He threw out my case without letting me speak. He blinked, as if trying to reconcile the injustice of years past with the truth unfolding now. Now I understand why. His voice cracked, not with anger, but with something more dangerous. Vindication. A murmur swept through the spectators like wind through dry grass. The room wasn't just watching justice. It was suddenly remembering its own wounds. At the front of the room, the representative for the Faith and Family Foundation, an older man with a weathered face and tired eyes, stood motionless, hands clenched tightly at his sides. For a moment he looked frozen, as if the chaos had numbed him. Then slowly his shoulders shook, and he raised both hands to his face. He didn't speak. He just broke. Silently at first, then with a gasp so raw it cut straight through the silence. "You saved us," he choked, tears spilling down his cheeks as he looked at Jasmine. "You saved our name, and you saved our belief that the system could still be something more than a weapon." His voice cracked again. "You didn't just defend the foundation. You defended the very idea of justice." Jasmine didn't respond right away. Her eyes softened, but she didn't smile. She couldn't. Not in this room. Not yet. She nodded once, her throat tight, her posture still strong, because she knew what everyone else was just beginning to understand. The fight wasn't over. The mask had been ripped off one face, but the rot ran deeper. And if she had to walk into 10 more courtrooms like this, against 10 more Carters, she would. Because today wasn't just about one verdict. It was about proving that justice, when fought for relentlessly, still had a pulse. And it had just started to beat louder. The courthouse steps were no longer just concrete. They had become a stage, an altar, where truth had just demanded its place in history. The doors creaked open one final time that afternoon, and the crowd outside surged forward as Jasmine Crockett emerged. Her posture was calm but unshakable, her black suit dusted with the weight of everything she had just torn through inside. But on her face, no fatigue, no surrender. Only the piercing clarity of someone who had stared into the machine and forced it to blink first. Flash bulbs exploded like lightning in a storm. Journalists screamed her name from all directions. "Ms. Crockett, is Carter just the beginning? Will there be more arrests? What does this mean for the federal bench?" But she didn't rush. She didn't panic. She descended those granite steps with the composure of a soldier returning from battle. Scarred, sure, but victorious. A man thrust a microphone in her face. Cameras swarmed like a tide. Still, she kept walking until she reached the final step, and then she stopped. Silence fell, as if the crowd knew the gravity of what was about to come. Jasmine looked directly into the lens of the camera in front of her, the red recording light glowing like a living witness. She didn't smile. Her voice didn't tremble. "No one," she said, "is above the law. Not a donor, not a party, not a judge. No one." She let the words hang in the air, let them settle like dust after a collapse. "And if this courtroom taught us anything today," she continued, "it's that justice isn't something we wait for. It's something we fight for." A wave of cheers erupted. Someone in the back shouted her name. Flash after flash lit up her face like gunfire frozen in time. But this wasn't just about applause. In the minutes that followed, the internet did what the internet does best. It caught fire. The video of Judge Carter being escorted in cuffs down the aisle, robe disheveled, shouting, "I am the law," while Jasmine stood behind him, calm and unrelenting, was clipped and shared at light speed. Within 23 minutes, it had racked up 1.2 million views. By the end of the hour, 5 million, then 10. It wasn't just trending, it was transforming. Hashtags bloomed across platforms like banners raised on digital battlegrounds. # Justice for Faith, # Crockett for Justice, # No One Above the Law. Teenagers who didn't care about politics posted it with captions like, "This is how you do it." Veterans shared it with the words, "We fought for this." One viral post read, "She didn't scream. She didn't fold. She brought truth into a room built to silence it." And then came the veteran. He stood alone at the edge of the press crowd, tall, broad-shouldered, his silver hair tucked under a faded U.S. Army cap. No camera crew followed him. No interview awaited, but he lifted a hand-lettered cardboard sign high above his head. It was written in permanent marker, the corners bent, the words shaky but bold. "Justice isn't dead. It just needed someone brave enough to stand." The crowd noticed. Cameras panned. A still shot of him, backlit by sunset, sign held aloft, went viral by midnight. It wasn't just an image. It was a symbol, an echo of everything this country had forgotten it could be. Jasmine saw the sign. She didn't say anything, but her lips pressed together in a small, silent acknowledgement. Not of herself, but of the truth behind those words. She had stood, and in doing so, she had pulled something back from the brink, not just for faith and family, but for every person who'd been steamrolled by a system designed to forget their names. By morning, the headlines weren't confined to national papers. They leapt oceans. The Guardian led with, U.S. federal judge arrested after legal showdown, led by Gen Z civil rights lawyer. Le Monde ran, États-Unis, une avocate de la Maison-Blanche fait tomber un juge corrompu. Der Spiegel's cover called it Das Gerechtigkeitserdbeben, the justice earthquake. Even Al Jazeera featured it in primetime. The narrative was simple but profound. One woman, one courtroom, one truth too heavy to bury. Back in Washington, the White House press briefing was packed wall to wall. When the president's press secretary stepped to the podium, the first question wasn't about inflation or international policy. It was about Jasmine Crockett. Will the administration support a full-scale investigation into the Liberty Fund network? One reporter asked. Another followed, was Ms. Crockett acting under direct orders? The spokesperson didn't flinch. Ms. Crockett followed the law, he said. What she uncovered speaks for itself. And yes, this administration supports every effort to root out corruption wherever it hides. Meanwhile, in communities across America, something stirred. Churches that had partnered with the Faith and Family Foundation rang their bells. Youth groups played Jasmine's speech during evening meetings. In Dallas, a group of law students marched silently across campus, holding candles and signs that read, "Honor the Truth." In Minneapolis, a middle school civics teacher scrapped her lesson plan to show her students Jasmine's courtroom moment, saying simply, "This is what justice looks like." It wasn't politics, it was principle. It was a reminder that the courtroom, long seen as a cold chamber of delay and disappointment, could still burn with fire when the right voice entered. But behind all the noise, behind the clips and tweets and headlines, stood Jasmine herself. She returned to the courthouse later that evening, long after the cameras had left. The steps were empty now. The marble glowed amber in the dying light. She stood at the bottom for a moment, then walked up slowly, her heels echoing like memories in the silence. At the top, she looked at the doors, closed now, guarded only by 2 posted officers and the ghosts of what had happened inside. She didn't knock. She didn't go in. She simply looked up at the sky, exhaled deeply, and whispered something no microphone could hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a promise, maybe both. She had won the battle, but the war was still coming. Inside the building, agents were still reviewing Carter's files. Already, 3 more names from his network had triggered federal audits. Judges in Missouri, Arizona, and North Carolina had suddenly canceled public appearances. One had lawyered up. The others issued vague denials. But Jasmine knew better. She'd seen what fear looked like. She'd watched it unravel a man who once believed he was invincible, and she was ready to watch it happen again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Agent Morris. 1 line. "We just found another list." She stared at it for a long moment, then replied, "Send it over. We're not done." And then she walked down those steps again, into the night, into history, into whatever storm would come next. Because in a world that had forgotten how to fight for what was right, Jasmine Crockett didn't just remember. She led the way. Jasmine stepped onto the porch, each footstep echoing softly against the wooden boards, her heart still racing as if she were walking away from the battlefield rather than returning home. The night's quiet calm felt foreign after the day's relentless storm of truths and confrontations. She paused at the door, breathing deeply, allowing herself a fleeting moment to gather her composure. The cool air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass, mingling gently with the comforting aroma of dinner simmering inside. She reached for the doorknob, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. Residual adrenaline from the fierce battle she'd just waged inside the halls of justice. The door opened smoothly, the soft creak of hinges giving way to the warm, amber glow of her home's interior. Standing there was her husband, framed in gentle lamplight, his eyes glowing with pride, admiration, and a quiet, fierce respect. He said nothing at first. Words weren't necessary at this moment. Instead, he stepped forward, drawing her into a firm embrace. His arms enveloped her in a strength that spoke louder than any words could. He had watched her fight, witnessed her bravery, and understood exactly what her victory had cost her. "You were incredible," he finally whispered, his voice low, rich with emotion. "Every single word, every piece of evidence. You showed everyone what real courage looks like. I've never been more proud of you." Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to feel the quiet strength of his support, the reassuring warmth of his pride filling the spaces that exhaustion had hollowed out inside her. Before she could respond, quick, eager footsteps sounded through the hallway, familiar and heartwarming. Her young daughter appeared, eyes wide with joyful innocence, her small face illuminated by the gentle smile Jasmine treasured above all else. Jasmine sank gracefully to her knees, holding her arms open wide. Her daughter rushed into her embrace, wrapping tiny arms around her mother's neck, squeezing tightly, as if sensing the weight Jasmine had carried that day. Holding her daughter close, Jasmine felt her heart steady, the tension within her slowly easing, replaced by profound clarity. She gently stroked her daughter's soft hair, whispering quietly yet firmly, "Mommy did the right thing today, sweetheart. Mommy stood up and made sure that truth still matters. But Mommy's job isn't finished yet, not by a long shot." The child nestled closer, sensing her mother's fierce determination even if she couldn't yet grasp the fullness of its meaning. Jasmine rose slowly, still holding her daughter tenderly in her arms, feeling the steady reassurance of her husband's gaze upon her. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. They both knew this victory was only the first in a much larger fight, a fight that would demand more strength, resilience, and courage than Jasmine had yet shown. But in that shared glance, there was an unspoken promise. Whatever came next, they would face it together, united and unbreakable. Jasmine moved further into their home, surrounded by warmth and love, yet acutely aware of the battles yet to come. But tonight, in this sacred, quiet moment, she allowed herself to draw strength from her family, from the profound love that anchored her. She felt her daughter's steady heartbeat against her chest, a reminder of why she had fought so fiercely today and why she would continue fighting, no matter the cost. Jasmine sat alone on the edge of the couch, the room wrapped in a hushed quiet only found after war. The glow of the floor lamp spilled gold across the floor, brushing against the framed family photos, the woven blanket folded neatly on the armchair, the quiet hum of the night that felt impossibly distant from the storm she had just walked through. Her daughter lay curled in her lap, breathing softly, one hand still fisted gently in the fabric of Jasmine's blazer. Small fingers that had no idea they were clinging to a woman who had just ripped the veil off a corrupt machine. The phone buzzed next to her, again, then again. Notifications poured in like a flash flood. News headlines, trending hashtags, shares, direct messages from strangers and allies and enemies alike. But Jasmine didn't look at the screen yet. Her eyes were fixed on her daughter's face. So small, so peaceful. A piece of her own heart lying there without fear, without pain. For a moment, Jasmine simply held her close, pressing her lips to her temple, breathing in the warm, innocent scent of safety, of home. Then slowly, she reached for her phone. She unlocked the screen and was immediately met with a digital storm. Every major network had picked up the footage. Carter in handcuffs, the courtroom erupting, Jasmine standing tall while the most powerful man in that building unraveled like cheap thread. Clips of her reading aloud Carter's incriminating emails had gone viral, stitched with the words, "This is what courage looks like." But Jasmine didn't get lost in the applause. She opened the Post editor and stared at the blinking cursor. Her fingers began to move, not from adrenaline, but from resolve. Each word struck with the weight of purpose. She typed, "Today was just the first step. We won't stop until justice is fully restored." Then she hit send. The post shot out into the world like a flare into a sky filled with watchful eyes. Thousands began to repost it within seconds. People were hungry for something that felt real, something that felt righteous. But Jasmine wasn't watching the shares or the likes. She was watching her daughter, still asleep, one foot twitching in a dream. And in that moment, Jasmine heard the thought rise inside her. Not loud, not cinematic, but sharp and cold as truth. "I cannot let you grow up in a country where justice is bought." She stared at her daughter for a long moment, heart tight. "You deserve better," she whispered, "so much better." She stood slowly, carrying her little girl to her room, placing her gently in bed, brushing soft curls from her forehead. Then she returned to the living room where her husband was waiting. He handed her a glass of water without a word. She took a sip, sat down beside him, their shoulders touching. "They're going to come after me," she said quietly. He didn't blink. "Let them," he replied. "You already showed them you're not afraid." She looked down at her phone again. Messages were pouring in. People she hadn't heard from in years. Survivors of corrupted trials. Whistleblowers, anonymous tips. One message stood out. It was from a young public defender in Ohio. "I saw something similar happen with Judge number 4 on that list. I have transcripts. If you need help building the case, I'm in." Jasmine replied immediately. "Send everything." "We're not done." She turned to her husband. "We'll need a team. Lawyers, journalists, data analysts. This is bigger than Carter." He nodded. "I've already started a list." She smiled faintly. "Of course you have." Another message came in. An invitation to speak on national television. Another from a nonprofit offering to help fund independent investigations. Another from a journalist in London asking if Jasmine believed the corruption reached international donors. She didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she set the phone down, leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment. Tomorrow would come fast. And with it, retaliation, smear campaigns, threats, legal maneuvers from those who wanted the truth to stay buried. She would be called a liar, a radical, a disruptor. But Jasmine didn't fear that anymore, because today she had walked into a courtroom built to silence her, and she had made it listen. And because tonight her daughter was sleeping soundly in a home where truth was protected, because now the whole world was watching, and she would not stop. The aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's courtroom stand rippled far beyond the federal building where it began. What started as a hearing on one charity's reputation exploded into a nationwide reckoning. But beneath the headlines, the hashtags, and the cheers of victory lay a deeper question, the kind that echoed long after the crowd had dispersed and the cameras had powered down. What does it cost to stand alone against a broken system? And what do we owe to the truth when silence is safer? This story was never just about a corrupt judge. It was about the quiet rot of unchecked power, the way influence seeps behind closed doors, how justice is quietly strangled under the weight of money, favoritism, and fear. Jasmine didn't simply confront a man in robes. She confronted a machine designed to shield itself from scrutiny, to punish those who asked the wrong questions, and to grind down anyone who dared to fight it with nothing but truth in their hands. Most people would have folded. Many had, for decades. But Jasmine didn't. She stood her ground while a man with federal power bellowed threats, tried to publicly humiliate her, and nearly had her dragged from the courtroom in contempt. She endured laughter from the gallery, the condescension of men twice her age, in the whisper of doubt from the supposed allies. She was called a puppet, a liar, a little girl who didn't know the law. She was told to sit down, to be quiet, to remember her place, and she answered them with evidence. She didn't scream. She didn't retaliate in anger. She flipped page after page of cold, irrefutable facts, bank statements, emails, timestamps, until the weight of the truth crushed the arrogance in that room. And when they accused her of fabrication, when they tried to discredit her, she reached into her pocket and pressed play. Her enemy's voice, ordering the destruction of justice, filled the air like a confession from hell itself. That moment wasn't just a courtroom climax. It was a mirror, forcing every witness, every viewer, every American to confront the uncomfortable truth. Justice is not self-sustaining. It does not defend itself. And it is not immune to corruption simply because it wears a robe or hangs a flag behind its desk. Justice lives or dies by the people who are willing to bleed for it. That's the lesson. You don't need a badge or a bench to demand truth. You need courage. You need resilience. You need the kind of spine that doesn't crumble when power threatens to crush you. Jasmine Crockett wasn't backed by a political machine. She wasn't protected by rank or entitlement. She walked into that courtroom as a Black woman, a civil rights lawyer, a mother, and a citizen, and she dared to hold the line. And because she did, one of the most protected men in the judicial system fell. Because she did, a movement began. This story reminds us that injustice doesn't always look like a violent crime. Sometimes it wears a suit, it signs documents, it deletes files, it smiles in photographs and delivers rulings that quietly destroy lives. That kind of injustice is the most dangerous because it cloaks itself in legitimacy. It hides in plain sight in systems that most of us are taught to trust without question. But when one person breaks that silence, when one voice refuses to be buried, it becomes a crack in the facade. That crack spreads. It reaches jurors. It reaches whistleblowers. It reaches journalists and janitors and clerks and students. And before long, what once seemed untouchable begins to crumble. Jasmine Crockett's stand didn't just topple a man. It exposed a network. It opened doors that had been sealed shut by fear and silence. It forced a nation to ask, how many others are hiding in those robes? How many verdicts were bought? How many lives were destroyed by greed pretending to be justice? That's the human cost. And that's why Jasmine's stand matters. Because this isn't fiction. It isn't just a compelling headline or a courtroom drama. It's a reflection of the world we live in. A world where too often the powerful assume they are immune to consequence, where truth is treated like a nuisance, and where silence is weaponized as complicity. But Jasmine didn't stay silent. She reminded us that every time someone speaks truth in a room designed to suppress it, the system shudders. Every time someone refuses to be intimidated, the corrupt lose a little more ground. And every time someone says enough, justice claws its way back from the shadows. The lesson isn't that Jasmine was brave. The lesson is that bravery is contagious. Her stand didn't end when the gavel fell or when Carter was led away in cuffs. It ignited something larger, an awakening in the hearts of those who'd stopped believing change was possible. It taught us that you don't need permission to do what's right, that dignity can withstand ridicule. That truth, when spoken clearly and backed by evidence, is stronger than any threat. And most of all, it showed us that justice is not a relic. It is not dead. It just needs someone brave enough to stand up and drag it back into the light. Even if they stand alone, especially if they stand alone. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.